So you find a way then to do it without the parents. But it has taught me that when parent relationships are possible, they only help your relationships with the students. After my first year of teaching in Minneapolis, I was laid off, which happens to most people who teach their first year in Minneapolis. I joined Teach for America and went to South Texas, to a small town on the border called Rio Grande City. Much like at Smith College, many of the people I was in Teach for America with were having their first experience in a public school when they set into the classroom to teach it. I lived in an area that was extremely economically depressed. When we went down to find housing in the town, we were told, because there was no local newspaper with housing advertisements or websites that you could check on, in part because it was about 7 years ago, they told us to go around and knock on people's doors and ask them if they have heard of any rental places available. And we did, and it worked because we all found housing, but it was kind of a harrowing experience. This is a house on, this is a house on the block that I ended up living in. It is, Starr County, Texas is an extremely poor county, one of the poorest in the country. It was probably the most formative of my teaching experiences. There was no racial diversity to speak of. Students all fell along a continuum of mixed European and indigenous heritage, as most Mexican people do. The difference was in nationality. Whether people were born in the US or born in Mexico was the dividing factor. It's the first time I ever heard the term Mexican national, meaning someone who's a Mexican citizen. But to my students, it was a tremendously large dividing factor. Texas was I lived and worked in a very close-knit community, which was a new experience for me, being someone who's from a city. Perhaps some of you will end up going to teach in small towns. The community was so close-knit that I decided early in my first year teaching there to go out with a group of coworkers to the bar after work on Friday for happy hour. It was 4:30 and I was at a bar with a group of like 8 other teachers, both males and females. I had no inkling of an idea that there was anything controversial about that. However, when I got back to work on Monday, at least 3 other staff members talked to me and let me know that women didn't go to bars in that town. So I didn't go to bars in that town anymore. Because it's important to be sensitive to the community that you're teaching in. I did find my place in the community in other ways, better ways actually, I think, as a librarian. I started a book club with one of my coworkers who was able to recruit from his group of friends, local professionals that had grown up in the town. I recruited some of my colleagues in Teach for America, and it became a tremendous opportunity for all of us to become part of the community we were teaching in. I would encourage anyone who is going to go teach in a small town to try to become as much a part of the community as possible. It only makes you a more effective educator and gives you more insight into your students' lives. In Texas, I also had my first experience teaching regular ed English, where I got to teach the same subject 5 times a day, or the same class 5 times a day, the same subject too. And I found that my first time through, I usually was tripping over my own tongue and got through about half of what I had planned. But by my 5th period, I really had it down to a science. I think that that happens with all of us as we get to teach the same subject year after year. It gets so much easier each run through. You can adjust what doesn't work and highlight what does. It's a little easier when the process is faster, though, and you're teaching secondary. I also clung to structure and routine. I set up procedures for my classroom. I had every minute planned, and it helped. It was really wonderful. Even though my students oftentimes seemed to not like the amount of structure and routine that I imposed on them, I realized when I had been gone and had a substitute teacher who wasn't able to run our DOLs, you know, the sentence corrections that you'll put up on the overhead to start off class with. I came back to school the next day and my students had about 5 ways in which the substitute had messed up the DOL that they wanted to report to me immediately. And I thought, oh, they do like it, and they are paying attention. Sometimes that's what it takes, though, to tell. Another thing that I learned when I was teaching in Texas is how wonderful it is to be able to get involved in extracurricular activities with your students. It allows you to build a completely different kind of relationship with them, one that's not centered around you giving them a grade or evaluating their performance. It's tremendously powerful. It's a tremendously powerful way of mentoring students. I invited the group of students who I taught, or who I coached in speech making, which is, we were a great group because I think it takes equal amounts of nerdiness to want to take and coach speech as a club. I was able to have them over to my house for a brunch at the end of our season, and it was one of the highlights of my teaching career. After my time in Texas, I decided I wanted to try something completely different in terms of teaching. I moved from rural Texas to Brooklyn, which is about as big of a change as you can get, cross-country and completely different in almost every way. I also decided to switch grade levels that I was teaching, to switch from secondary to primary. I had a K-12 license at EBD, and I thought it would be fun to try out a primary classroom. It was not fun. It was the most horrible, horrible flop of my teaching career, and I spent the great majority of the year floundering. I remember halfway through the year thinking, I've spent half of this school year sitting on a student, literally restraining the student all the time. She was an 8-year-old girl who was just being diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they were trying to balance out her meds so that she could function, really, and she couldn't. It was very hard. The good thing about teaching in that kind of an environment where nothing was going right is I learned how to ask for help. That's not my class. That's another classroom. Those aren't primary students, but I took some pictures of another class because I didn't have many of those students. I learned to ask for help, though. I learned to ask my colleagues because nothing that I seemed to know how to do seemed to be working. So I asked other people, and I tried everything. It was very humbling, but it also taught me that we don't have to operate in isolation. It's a lot easier when we don't even try. I'm going to skip that story because I'm already running short on time. I also learned how to try different angles. And that, even if it takes 8 or 10 attempts to solve the same problem in a different way, there will eventually be something that works. Your persistence is the only limitation. There is a solution to every single problem. I had a student who was having a lot of behavior problems in his mainstream class that he was sent out to. So we went down the list. We tried charts, we tried stickers, we tried computer time, and we tried just regular free time. We kept trying everything. We tried extra recess. Nothing was working. Finally, the thing that worked was a puzzle. You know, just randomly one day, I was feeling at the end of my rope, and I gave him a puzzle, and it took. So sometimes you never know. It seems like it couldn't possibly be effective. Sometimes that's just the very thing. And most importantly, I learned not to